It was about Wednesday, I think it was, when Pastor Mario contacted me to say he wasn't able to be here today. He has the flu and he didn't want to spread it to everybody else. I contacted him on Thursday and he didn't sound 100%, so I guess we better forgive him, hey. That hymn we have just sung, actually the two hymns we've had this morning, it didn't sound as though anybody knew them very well. The first hymn we had, who knew that first hymn? Okay, that explains why we didn't sing it so well. You've never heard it before, never sung it before? Okay. What about the one we've just sung? Who knows that one? I've got a confession to make. That was the first hymn I ever learnt to play on piano. Now, I don't play the piano now, but I did learn at one stage, and that was the first hymn that I ever learnt to play, and I think if I sat down I could probably still play it because I learnt to play it without the music in front of me. But they're good hymns. When we go through this sermon, I like to pick hymns that fit in with the sermon itself. But with what I'm talking about today, it was very hard to find hymns that fitted in totally with the sermon, but they're still good hymns that we sing. And hymns are just so powerful, the words themselves, but when you put the music to it, it just makes it brings a lot more power to it. This morning, I want you to take your Bibles if you've got them with you, and we're going to read, I want to read a passage from Ecclesiastes, and chapter 3, and I'm sure Mark will have it up on the screen for us anyway. Ecclesiastes, can't see him up there. Oh, he is there. He's hiding behind the light from where I am. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verses 1 to 8. Thanks, Mark. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill, although we don't kill, do we? A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to get and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to rend and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time of war and a time of peace. What is time? We go through this list, and it's quite an extensive list. It covers nearly every aspect of life. So there is a time for us to do everything within life itself. But what is time? If you had to describe time to somebody that knew nothing about it, how would you describe time to somebody? What is time? How do we use our time? Where did time start? Where was the first mention of time in the Bible? As you go through and do a search for time in the Bible itself, you get lots of verses coming up that somebody did something 3 times over, or that sort of time, but not time that we're talking about this morning. Where did it start? It started at creation, didn't it? What did God do? He created on the first day, and the evening and the morning were the first day. The evening and the morning were the second day, and so on. And there we get a period of time, a day. And then that equates to a week at the end of the week. Do you find the use of the word hour, like we talk about time, we think about minutes and seconds and hours, do you find the word hour in Scripture? And I found this interesting, that in Daniel 3 and verse 6, it talks about, and those falleth not down and worshippeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. So we have a mention of an hour. Now, is this really meaning within this 60-second period? Probably not. If you look at what the word means in its original, it's probably not really referring to that. But it's the first instance I could find of hour mentioned in the Bible. So I ask you again, is time important? Is it important to God? Prophecy demonstrates that it is. In our prophecies, we see these time prophecies, very specific. We don't get down to the hours and the minutes, but they are very specific itself. And in our Sabbath school lessons, we've been talking about some of Daniel's prophecies and Revelation. And yes, time is important to God. Jesus was born. He came on time. He came into the world right on time. The Sabbath is a period of time. And that's very important to us. And that was given to us at the end of Creations Week. We must remember that back in Bible times, there was no clocks. I remember talking to my boss's wife that I work for when I'm driving other buses once some time ago, and she knows I'm an Adventist, and they do their best to make sure I'm off the road well before Sabbath. And she said to me once, it was just before Christmas, and Sabbath comes in pretty late, and she said to me, we've got this job we want you to do on Friday afternoon. But she said, I don't want to embarrass you by having you not off the road in time for Sabbath. So she said, how does the Sabbath work? She said, is it 3 o'clock you've got to be off the road by? And I just smiled. I said, no, it works by the sun. And she looked at me for a while. I said, well, think about it. There was no clocks in Bible times, was there? And she went, that's right. Now, she was a Bible student herself. And she said, oh, that's right. And we don't have that specific set time necessarily in the things of the Bible, but it is important. God used another way of telling us how important time was to us. And the Sabbath is very important. We need to look after the Sabbath and do what we can to do what God asks us to do with regards to the Sabbath. Another thing I looked up when I was looking for information on this was I wondered if there was any where God did something specific time-wise in Scripture. And I found this, and I remembered reading it from some time ago, but I found it again. Isaiah 38 and verse 8. Behold, I will bring again the shadow of the degrees which is gone down in the sundial. Now, we don't use sundials today. We see them sometimes. But here is a mention of a sundial. And what was going to happen? The sun was going to go backwards by how much? 10 degrees. Now, can anybody tell me what that equates to in our time today? No? The closest we can come to it, this is the explanation I've received anyway, it's about 20 minutes. So here God is using something that we think can't happen. He's sending the time backwards by 10 minutes. Does God expect us to be diligent with our time? Is time important to God? Does He expect us to be diligent with what we do with our time? We live in an age where we are governed by time. Time is everywhere. We have timetables for buses. We have timetables for our trains. It governs us all the time. What about our traffic lights? Now, some time ago, quite a few years ago, and I'm looking at Anne over here, I used to pick your grandson up from Glenmore Park and take him to school. And he used to read his books to me for homework. Sir, can I read you? Yes. And I think your daughter said to me one day, you've got more signatures in his homework book than I have, because he would read to me on the way home. And one of the books that I remember Jaden reading to me was about traffic lights and how they are operated. Now, a lot of the time they are operated by something in the road, and that triggers how many cars and so on, but there is still a time factor in it. And I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but you pull up a set of lights, and if you know the phasing of the lights, make sure you know the phasing of the lights before you do this, and you watch. And when this light goes red, the next green light that you'll be waiting for will be 3 seconds. Were you aware of that? Near enough perfect to 3 seconds. It is timed. And it's quite interesting. With the bus, you can't always get off the mark first, but if you do this, you can. And sometimes people say, how did he know that was going to change then? You've got to be careful how you do it. But there is a time factor in it. So even our traffic lights are timed. Josh Billings said this, time is like money. The less we have of it to spare, the further we make it go. Think about that. The less time we have, the more we seem to be able to make it go that little bit further. If you want something done, who do you give the work to? Somebody who's got lots of time? Give it to a busy person. Yeah. Lord Chesterfield says this, the less one has to do, the less time one finds to do it in. Do you find that? Sunday morning. Okay, I think most of us get up and do lots of things on Sunday because Sunday is very sacred to us as Adventists, isn't it? We've got the lawns to mow and all that sort of thing. But if we are sitting around doing nothing, it's just one of those things, isn't it? I want you to imagine that there is a bank that credits your account each morning with $86,400. Be great, wouldn't it? Yeah, Margaret thinks this is a good idea. But it carries over no balance from day to day. Every evening, the bank deletes whatever part of the balance you failed to use during the day. What would you do? What would you do with it, Margaret? Would you leave it there? Or would you take it out and do something with it? I think I'd be taking it out and doing something with it if I could. Every evening, the bank deletes whatever part of the balance you failed to use during the day. What would you do? Draw out every cent, of course. You know, each of us has such a bank. Its name is time. Every morning, it credits you with 86,400 seconds. Every morning, that's what you've got, 86,400 seconds. Every night, it writes off as lost whatever of this you have failed to invest to good purpose. It carries over no balance. It allows no overdraft. Each day it opens a new account for you. Each night it burns the remains of the day. If you fail to use the day's deposits, the loss is yours. There is no going back. There is no drawing against tomorrow. You must live in the present on today's deposits. Invest it so as to get from it the utmost in health, happiness, and success. The clock is running. Make the most of it. We live by time. Time seems to govern everything we do. Have you ever stopped to think how we can govern time, though? We need to turn this around. Instead of it governing us, how can we govern time? Is it possible? Sometimes people say, someone else seems to have a lot more time than what I do. And I've had people say that to me, it's all right for you, you've got plenty of time. And I say to them, well, I've got the same amount of time that you have. We all have the same amount of time. We have 60 seconds in a minute. Do you have 60 seconds in your minute? Yep. What about 60 minutes in an hour? Do you have that? Yep. We all have 24 hours in a day. 24 hours in a day? Yep. 7 days in your week. So we've all got the same amount of time. It's not a matter of the time itself, but how we plan to use it. And I think this is very important. I asked Mr. Google, if in doubt, you always ask Mr. Google, right? Why? I was talking to Dennis before and he was telling me about a problem he had with his car and he went and asked Mr. Google about it too, but Mr. Google hasn't given him the right answer yet, so Mr. Google doesn't have all the answers all the time. But I did a search. So why is there such a lack of time? And here are 7 reasons that Mr. Google came up with. Sometimes the problem is that someone else sets our agenda. So someone else tells us what we're supposed to be doing. It schedules our tasks and so on. The next one is you don't know what to say no to. Do you meet people like that? Can you do this? Yeah, I'll do it. Can you do it? Yeah, I'll do it. They don't stop to think how much time it's going to take. And I can think of different ones like this. And one in particular has been given a nickname, Mr. Nice Guy who can't say no to anything. And it's so frustrating. Yes, I'll do it. And then at the end of the day, have you done, oh no, I haven't had time, because we've got to learn in our way of dealing with time to say no. There are times we have to say no. Another one that Mr. Google came up with was, we can do so many things these days, so we do it. We try to cram so much more into our days. We want to keep an eye on everything because the world is complex and changing, and we are constantly distracted. Number 5, our physical workplaces encourage distractions. Do you get distracted in your workplace? I have 47 distractions sitting behind me, not every morning and every afternoon. And I tell you, that can be quite a distraction. Something has just come to mind. When I was driving the smaller bus, I had a little child on my bus, and she was actually related, not Daisy. She was actually related, and she wanted to share something with me one day, and I'm just pulling into a roundabout. And she was sitting in the seat directly behind me, and she said, Uncle Lynn, look at this, what's this? And over, right in front of me, came a book, right in the middle of an intersection, right in the middle of a roundabout. Get it out of here. So yes, we have distractions in our workplace. And that can mean the difference between getting things done and not getting things done with our time. We are more connected than ever, and technology keeps the channels open. Yeah, we've got our phones, everything's there. And so it's hard sometimes to tune out, but we need to. Being generalists, we tackle new things over and over and never really get anywhere with it. So we've got to look at time. Robert Obden says this about time. Time flies. It's up to you to be the navigator. Do we normally plan our time? Do we plan what we want to do, or do we just let things happen? And we need to plan wisely. And it's been said that if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. How true is that? So how do we plan our time? A lecturer at a university is giving a pre-exam lecture on time management. On his desk is a bag of sand, a bag of pebbles, some big rocks, and a bucket. He asks for a volunteer to put all 3 grades of stone into the bucket. A keen student duly steps up to take out the task, starting with the sand, then the pebbles, then the rocks, which do not all fit in the bucket. And this is to show about poor time management. This is what we don't do with time management, drills the lecturer. If you'd have put the rocks in first, then the pebbles, then the sand, all 3 would have fit. Now, I've never tried it, but it's true. You put the bigger stuff in first, then the smaller, and shake it, and it all fits in. You leave room to complete your medium task and then your smaller ones. By completing your smallest tasks first, you spend so much time on them, you leave yourself unable to complete either medium or large tasks. And I'm learning something from this. And the lecturer refills the bucket. Big rocks first, then the pebbles, then the sand, shaking the bucket between each so that everything fits in. Moral: plan time slots for your big issues before anything else, or the inevitable sand and water issues will fill up your days and you won't be able to fit in the big issues. What do you do when you've got a lot of things on your plate? And I was thinking about this, board members. We get into a board meeting and what do? We've got this big item that we need to deal with. There's these few little ones we'll get rid of first. We just need to rubber stamp these. Do you tend to do that with what you're doing? I tend to. I'll just get this out of the road and that out of the road, then I'll deal with this bigger issue. This is suggesting we don't do that. And I can see wisdom in this. Deal with those big problems. Spend the time getting those big problems sorted out. And then the little ones will just fit into place later. God has only asked for 1/7 of our time. Not very much, is it? In Exodus 20 and verses 8 to 11, we read about the Sabbath commandment. Are we planning our Sabbath? Are we planning each week what we're going to do on Sabbath? How do we plan our time? I get more done when I make a list. Who's a list person? Yep. I think we're all list people, really. When we go shopping, I say to Heather, have you got your list? Yeah. Can I check it to see what's on it? So, I can add something or whatever. My list is up here. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. That works for some people. But I'm a list person. I know that if I've got a lot of things to do, if I make a list, then I can get it done. And time needs to come into that. We need to get realistic with our times, though. And I guess the easiest way to explain this, we've got to make sure that when we put stuff down and times beside it that we're going to get it done by, that it's realistic. It's no good saying, we used to live 3.5 minutes from church when we lived in High Street. And Heather used to say, it's okay, we don't need to leave yet. We're only 3.5 minutes away. Is that realistic to expect to be here on time, every time, when we're only that far away? What happens when somebody runs up the back of somebody else just out here somewhere and you've got to sit and wait at the lights or whatever? So we must be realistic. I guess the easiest way for me to explain this is my routine of a morning. Now, I have my bus parked at home, and so all I've got to do is walk out and get in the bus and drive off. Now, I have to be at my first stop at 6:55. So does that mean I leave home? I'm 10 minutes away from there. Do I leave home to walk out to my bus at around 22? No, I've got to be realistic. My bus, as most buses are, run on air. There's a lot of air involved. And so that drains overnight, and you've got to build that air up. So that takes time. I've got to build that into my time slot. You'll notice a lot of heavy vehicles, they sit idling for a while. I can't move my bus unless the air pressure is up to a certain thing. The brakes lock on when there's no air, and that makes them very safe. And I've got to build up that air pressure. So I've got to build that into my thinking. And so what I do, I know, with everything I've got to do, I've got to be basically walking out the door at 6:30, or at least putting my shoes on to walk out the door at 6:30, so that I can be out the door at 6:35. Now, if something happens, which inevitably does, for those of us men that are getting a little older, we know that we've got to go sometimes, don't we? And it's always at the inconvenient time. And so inevitably, you'll be ready to walk out the door. Oh, I've just got to make a toilet break. So you can lose a couple of minutes. Then I've got to go out and I've got to start the bus. Now, I've got to let it, as I said, build up air pressure, and that can take 5 to 10 minutes. But other things can go wrong. Sometimes in winter, there's ice that I've got to get off the screen and so on. But Keith, shh, no flat batteries, please. We can't push this one to start it. The brakes are locked on, and if we have a flat battery in my bus, we've got big problems. But what I'm getting at is we need to build these little buffers, these little extras into our time slots when we're working out our time for our routine. And I find that works. It works for me. And so if something happens, I've still got that little bit of time up my sleeve. And sometimes our landlord who lives just across the road needs to see me about something. He'll come over just as I'm ready to drive out. And so you've got to have those little buffers. And that's the way I find it. It works for me. And when I'm doing work for the other company I work for, the same thing. You know, you have a list. This is your job. This is where you've got to go to. You need to have your bus in position at 10 to 9. Your pickup is at 9 o'clock. And so you have that buffer built into it. This morning I want you to remember 4 words for me when we're thinking about planning our time. Just 4 words. And they are, and I want you to repeat them with me. The first one is temperance. Temperance, right? Importance. Be mindful. And enthusiastic. Okay, can you remember them? What are they? Importance, mindful, and enthusiastic. Okay. The first one, temperance. In 1 Corinthians 9:25 we read, "And every man that striveth for the mastery is" what? "Temperate in all things." And this means with our time management as well. Now, quite often in the past, as Adventists, we have quoted this, and a lot of other denominations have done the same, that we read this as no alcohol. That's it. You know, that's our temperance. We don't indulge in alcohol. It says we have to be temperate in all things. And so we need to make sure our time is balanced out correctly. We need our rest. We need our recreation. To be temperate, we need to plan. We need to work out how long it will take to achieve different things, as we've just spoken about. Allow a little extra time. Don't just have a to-do list. I'm going to make mention of that in a minute. Don't just have a to-do list, but we need to be aware of the times on our to-do list. Now, as I said, I'm a list person, and I've found an app in my phone, or I've got an app on my phone which is very good for working out what I need to do. And I can just type things in there and so on. And that syncs with my tab and it syncs with my computer. So if I'm just got my tab with me, I know what I've got to do. Good idea, except when they go off when they shouldn't. So we need to be aware of that. People who cannot find time for recreation are obliged sooner or later to find time for illness. And that's a comment by John Waynemarker. So we need to build our recreation into our time slots. Jack Bergman says there's never enough time to do it right, but there's always enough time to do it over. And sometimes we rush things to get it done, but then we've got to go back and redo it, think it through in the first place. So what have I been talking about here? What was that first word? Temperance. Be temperate with our time. What was the second word I asked you to remember? Importance. Oh, this is good. And so listening or thinking back to that illustration we used before, work out what's important to you. You know, is this important or is that important? Is it important to be on time for appointments? Do we need to be on time for appointments? I think it is. It's important to you not to keep people waiting. What's happening if you make an appointment with someone and then you are there waiting and they don't turn up? Do you feel frustrated about it? Do you get angry about it, like the story this morning? We had quite a discussion about anger out in the back room this morning, Rosemary, didn't we? Yeah. Do you get angry about it? Keith, I say to you, I'm going to come and meet with you at wherever. I was going to say Macca's, but I know you wouldn't be in that. But we're going to meet. And I turn up half an hour late. What have I done to Keith? I have stolen that half hour of time from him. He's been sitting there waiting, patiently. And here I am, I don't care, And so we are stealing from somebody when we don't keep our appointments. We shouldn't keep them waiting. It's stealing from them. You're stealing their time. What about when we come late to Sabbath school and church? Are we stealing? Yes? Who are we stealing from? We're stealing from God. We need to keep this in mind. First word that we asked you to remember was what? The second one? Importance. Third one? Mindful. And I've written down the golden rule here. Luke 6:31. Do unto others, this is my interpretation, as you would have them do to you. Be mindful so we don't keep them waiting. We make sure if we've made an appointment with someone, we are there on time. Our pastor, when I wanted to meet him back before Christmas, and he said, we made an appointment to meet, I think it was 10 o'clock, and he said, that's okay, I'll be there at 9. Now, I've got to say, this guy is really over the top with his times. And I thought, oh yes, I know what pastors are like. I'll probably get there on time and he won't be there. And that morning I got held up with something with the bus. And I was leaving, I thought, I should be there about 5 past, it should be okay. So on the way I rang him. And he said, yeah, I've been here for 3/4 of an hour already. And I went, oh, okay. So be mindful. Do unto others. Would we want it being done to us? Do we want somebody to hold us up, make us wait? No, we don't. They have their agendas. Other people have their agendas as well. So we need to keep that in mind. Be mindful of them as well. They have deadlines. Try not to keep people waiting. Charles Dickens says, a day wasted on others is not wasted on oneself. It's simple, isn't it? We think it's wasted time, but it's not. So what was that about? What were those words again? Yep. And the last one is enthusiastic. Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 10. Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might, for there is work. We won't worry about the rest of it, nor device, nor knowledge, and so on about the grave. But it's saying to be enthusiastic. Whatever you find to do, do it with your might. If you are setting yourself things to do time-wise, do it enthusiastically. Don't put down your times and say, oh no, I've got to get this done by that time. Be enthusiastic about it. Be enthusiastic about what you hope to achieve. Be enthusiastic about life, about others and their needs. Now, I've given you these 4 words. If you were to take the first letter of each word, what do you have? Time. That's right. And that's what we need to be thinking about, the time that we can, our time and our time with others. Last Sabbath, Mark did an excellent job of bringing his sermon to us, his first one ever, and I thought he did an excellent job. Who remembers what he spoke about? The 5 love languages. Do you remember what those love languages were? Putting you to the test. Gifts, touch, words of affirmation, acts of service, and quality time. What is quality time? Time is okay, but we need quality time as well. Think about a time when you were a lot younger and you were trying to impress someone of the opposite sex. Was time important? Was quality time important? We wanted to make the big impression, right? Would you turn up late and keep them waiting? No. You would be giving them your undivided attention. And I don't know that this would happen so much, but maybe we should be even turning off our mobile phones. How often do we let these things govern our time and our life? We need to be undistracted with our time. I remember watching, Heather and I used to quite often go to a very expensive restaurant of a Sunday morning just for a bit of a break. And you know the one I mean, the one that's got those golden arches. And I remember going there one Sunday morning, and sitting down to have our breakfast, and in came a family, mum, dad, and one little child. Talk about lack of quality time. Dad sat down. I can't remember if he had his iPad or the paper. I think it was the paper. So he sits down with his paper. Mum comes along and sits on the other side with her iPhone. And little Bub comes and was sat in the chair. Here they are, a family out, and nobody interacting with anybody else. Talk about quality time or lack of it. Here's this little fella playing with his good breakfast, and oblivious, the parents oblivious to what was going on. What about quality time with church? It's important that we are on time. We usually make sure we're on time for work. So don't keep God waiting. It's the same as your employer. We need to give God undivided attention. We need to turn off those mobiles. I realise sometimes in certain work you've got to have it on. I know Rosemary has got to have hers on from time to time, and you'll see her, the phone will ring and she'll go out. Work related, we've got to do it. Sometimes, family reasons, we've got to keep it on. But basically we need to be putting those things aside. We need to learn to do what we're doing. When we come here, what are we coming here for? To catch up on our sleep? Or are we coming here to worship God? And if we're worshipping God, we need to put all these other things out of our mind. We waste so much time when we're here thinking about other things, Concentrate and do what we're doing. We're here to worship. We need to worship God. We don't want to be thinking about what we'll be doing when we go home. It's important that we worship God the way we should. To realise the value, and let's look at something else here, to realise the value of 1 year, like this is getting back to how important time is, to realise the value of 1 year, ask a student who failed a grade. Worked all that time through the year and failed. A year is a long time. To realise the value of 1 month, ask a mother who gave birth to a premature baby. A month is a long time. To realise the value of 1 week, ask the editor of a weekly newspaper what stress they're under. We don't have many newspapers anymore, but we still do have them. To realise the value of 1 hour, ask the lovers who are waiting to meet. An hour seems eternity, doesn't it? To realise the value of 1 minute, ask a person who missed a train or a bus. And we're not allowed, with the school bus, I'm not allowed to pick up regular passengers. And people see the bus coming and they run, and you've got to say, sorry. And I won't show you what some of the reactions are. But 1 minute is important to somebody who just missed a train or a bus. The value of 1 second, ask a person who just avoided an accident. You ever had this happen to you where you've been held up just for a few seconds, down the road is something dramatic, and yet you've missed it? As Maxwell Smart used to say, you missed it by that much. The value of a second. Treasure every moment that you have and reassure it more because you shared it with someone special enough to spend your time. Remember that time waits for no one. Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is mystery. Today is a gift. That's why it's called a present. Let's not waste our time let's not waste our time on others or have others waste their time on us. And above all, let's not waste God's time when we come to church on Sabbath morning. May God bless each one of us this morning.